Before the next episode of X Job Downloaded starts, I have a big favour to ask. If you've enjoyed any of our episodes so far, please can you click on the follow button on your platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon and YouTube. It costs nothing to follow, but makes a real difference to me as a podcast producer. Thank you. This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Maleary and this is X Job Downloaded. And today I'm going to interview Bob Scott. Now, Bob and I have known each other for some considerable time and I'm really grateful for seeing me on this Bank Holiday Monday. But where did it all begin for Bob Scott? Where were you born and what was your background?
Okay, my family were in the military. And so actually I was born in North Devon, but didn't spend any time there. And for the first 15 years, spent my life obviously trawling around the UK and overseas.
Oh, wow.
Moving schools routinely, regularly. And I think what they did is set me up to learn good interpersonal skills, make new friends or new acquaintances as quick as I could, because invariably it was 2 years turnaround. And so that's really where it began. And of course, I had quite a challenging relationship with my father, who was a classical ex-military guy. He was actually in the RAF police.
Oh, was he?
He was in SIB, and he was away a lot. And he was one of the old schoolers. His motto was, "You rule by fear till you can rule by consent." Mm. He said, "With you, unfortunately, I never got to the consent bit." And of course, I was never frightened of him either. So it was challenging. So when I got to about 15, I forget how many schools I'd done and how often we'd moved. I was clearly a reasonable athlete, a reasonable footballer, and I wanted a job that was outdoors. I didn't want to join the military, but I needed to do something because he was likely to be posted overseas again. So it happened that Essex had their cadet school, and it was a residential program, and they'd had their first year, and they were recruiting for their second year, and this was in the late 60s. And I passed. I got through and became a cadet there, the second ever intake of cadets, and it was manna from heaven. I was pretty properly institutionalised as a child anyway.
Yeah.
So moving into a residential environment was easy for me, and it got me away from, as I say, quite a challenging relationship with my father.
And you already knew how to clean your shoes because your dad would have been telling you to do that every day.
I did his boots and his brass buttons and everything for his uniform because he was a drill pig at times. My father was a bit of an enforcer. They used to parachute, not literally, but parachute into different parts of the world to sort out other people's problems within the Royal Air Force Military Police. So it was a tough cookie. But yeah, so all that regimental cleaning of shoes or boots, and of course in those days they were detachable collars, so had separate collars. It was fine. And I settled in there really well and really easily. And of course what it did, it gave me an opportunity to play sport, go to school, and prepare, for a future career in the police. And I was there just short of 3 years. I came away from there as top cadet. And my career then was being mapped out for me. You've done well in the cadets, you've done this, done that, get into the police, study, do your exams, get promoted. And I don't know what happened, but a switch flicked in my head at Irnsham Hall, and I came almost bottom of Irnsham Hall. I just switched off. The marching and all that was fine again. The shout and hollering at you by the drill pig was fine. That was at Irnsham Hall. Again, that bit, but I just switched off. And as a result, when I left there, I joined in January 1973, and I was posted to Basildon in March 73. And that was a punishment station. There was a few of us that ended up down there. And I remember going to the commander's office, divisional commander's office, who was, again, really old school. And he looked up at the 3 of us who were there then and said, "This is what I get," he says. "So I don't think any of you will last 3 months. Good luck." And that's it. We got marched out.
Well, I never.
And, of course, Basildon was an amazing place for me. It's deep in my heart still. I set about doing the job, a job that actually I loved. And I started on nights and very quickly realised that policing was just where I wanted to be. But I also equally quickly realised that I was quite good at falling over people, climbing out of windows, dumping cars. So I seemingly had this knack of being at the right place at the right time.
You make your own luck sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, I guess so. But that's how it seemed way back then. It all seemed pretty straightforward and easy. And what happened then was that within 18 months, I'd got pushed upstairs, as it was called then, as an aide to CID, because of the successes, I guess, I had as a bit of a thief taker. And found myself in a whole new world, a world that I didn't really know much about. You know, my thought of wearing a big hat, Basildon Town Centre and fighting with the yobs and all the stuff that went with that, and wearing a uniform was fantastic. But of course, suddenly I had a window opened into the world of CID, and then there were, at Basildon, I think there were probably 12 detectives, all looking old and grizzled and well worn.
Yeah.
And they were, there I was at just barely 21 as an aide.
I mean, it's fascinating because you're talking about a time when, you know, look at popular television, Life on Mars, Ashes to Ashes, all those. That was the beginning of it, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, looking back now, I've been out 20 years, unbelievably.
Amazing.
I completed my 30 years on January 11th, 2003. I don't use the R word because obviously, as you know, I'm now to have a 20-year career in the commercial sector. But looking back now, it was really quite pioneering. I mean, the pay wasn't very good. You had Edmund Davies in the mid-70s. When I went on to the CID, I was the first aide up there for a while. They hadn't had many recruits in the 70s. They couldn't recruit people because of the pay. So I was a novelty. And in those days, you were given meter breaks, stolen bicycles. And of course, also, then those days, there was a detective duty allowance. And you had to qualify for it by completing so many hours a month to get it. I mean, it was a pittance, but you had to. But of course, they made the aides and the young DCs work more hours than the old DCs to keep the hours up. And you got treated like, I don't quite know what the modern word would be for it, but certainly you were treated like a second-class citizen.
You were the lackey.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I loved it.
Yeah,
because it then the downside was all the guys I've been chasing and harassing in uniform looked at me as a uniform cop out of uniform for a while and weren't very communicative.
Yeah.
But after a while, I found that, of course, the whole ethos of where I was quite different from where I'd come from. And I found it exciting, and it was something I really wanted to do. And Basildon, as you would imagine, was full of opportunity. You know, it was a time where, you still had your long-term, we had your safe blowers still. We had some of those going on still, cracking safe with gel ignite just before the advent of the IRA bombings when they stopped using gel ignite because of it. You had your long-term burglars that were using a bit and brace that were knew Basildon and knew where they could break into houses and were doing many, many of those. And then there's the advent of the young robber. Armed robbers then were beginning to appear. And of course, Basildon being the town it was then, if not now, was they much associate themselves still with the East End. They weren't Essex people or Basildon people, they were London people.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of movement between East London and down that Thames corridor, Grays and Basildon. So it was a brilliant place to be as a young aspiring detective. And I embraced everything. I was utterly engulfed by the whole way of life. Very selfish, I have to add, very selfish, from my point of view. But I was absolutely and utterly immersed in what I was doing.
But it's brilliant, isn't it? Because what you're saying there, and if I put this in front of a young detective now, they wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to them, because actually I accept that the world has moved on, it's the online culture and all that, but people still commit burglaries. People still do robberies. They don't do the meter breaks in it. I mean, that was a classic probationer job, wasn't it? You go to somewhere where they've broken into their own electric meter, or if they had one on their television, gas meter, whatever it may be. I mean, obviously it doesn't happen now, but yeah, this is a completely different world, but it's modern history.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem so long ago now.
No.
I'm sure to the young officer, it does seem a long time ago. I think then what it did, for me certainly, was give me a grounding in meeting people as a plainclothes officer, because it was a different relationship than it was when I was in uniform, albeit I was only there 18 months. And it was routine, and there were, the success rate on detection was low, But depending on how much you wanted to graft and how you were able to identify the opportunities to get a success out of it and went for it, then you could. And we did. And, a very dear friend of mine came to Basildon at that time. And we were pals and business colleagues on the CID for many years at Basildon. I say many, I was only on the CID there for 4 years. Because in October 79, I got headhunted onto the 5 RCS, the Regional Crime Squad.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. So, and that was, again, because of the success, mostly then, towards the mid and late 70s, was, the rise of the armed robber. And in those days then, suddenly you were getting gangs going around and robbing restaurants and restaurant pubs, public houses for their tills and their cash.
Yeah.
Because then in those days, there was a lot more cash about in the 70s. And of course, what then it was the rise of was the cash in transit, because there was a lot more cash. And people may or may not remember, they were hugely successful. The armed robber became the celebrity of the late 70s.
Yes.
And the Bannister chainsaw robberies. And they would use extravagant ways of opening up cash in transit money boxes to steal cash, obviously armed. Rarely did anybody get shot, but occasionally they did.
Yeah.
But this became big business. And I kind of gravitated through from wanting to investigate crime to wanting to stop crime, to be proactive before it happened. And all this happened really quickly. And of course, Basildon gave me the opportunity because there were some good robbers down there with good connections into East London. And the whole thing really gathered a pace for me. And then suddenly in October 1979, there I was, the youngest detective on 5 RCS at Brentwood. And I thought what a lot of old grizzled men they were, and they were probably only in their 30s and 40s. But I suddenly then I'd gone from loving being in uniform, all right, only 18 months, loving going on to the CID and have my eyes open to investigating crime. And then as I got, I was obviously in a hurry. Then I got to see, well, actually, it's all very well processing crime and interviewing people, which I loved. And of course, in those days, it was, relied on confession, standard on
all
caution.
written down, yeah.
Yeah, it was he said, I said. And then going to court, I remember doing my own remands in front of Rathbone Danico, who was their then lead at JP at Billericay Magistrates Court. There was a young man doing all these things very quickly. And then, of course, at the Crown Court, the old one at Chelmsford, giving evidence because everybody fought it because it was I said, he said.
Yeah.
And, I absolutely got engulfed in all these kinds of challenges. But I knew then that I wanted to look at how could I then get intelligence about crimes about to be committed in the future. And of course, that then moved me on to the Regional Crime Squad. And that was right bang in the middle of when the armed robber was at their most. I mean, there was an open channel in the Met that we all used. And 5 RCS worked quite closely, which then was 9 RCS in the Met. And we routinely obviously operated in and out of the Met, even though 5 RCS was a huge area in its own. And there were multiple robberies every day, armed robberies, and you were never very far away from an armed robbery. And so we ended up, involved in investigating armed robberies, but obviously then sitting on plots for future robberies and having a fair degree of success. Of course, that's just what that spawned then was. There I was, my Kevin Keegan curly perm, one of the youngest people there, arrogant, an arrogant young man at 20, when it was 29, 27, 29, where would I be? Thereabouts. And absolutely loving it, embracing everything about that. We had surveillance. I'd never done surveillance before in the firearms, carrying guns.
Oh, you were a firearms officer?
Yeah. And all that entailed.
But what was the technology like then, Bob? Because obviously we've moved into the digital world. People work off of WhatsApp and their mobile phones. And what were the comms like?
There were no mobile phones.
No, of course.
And there was no pages then. It was a phone box. If you got lost or stranded, you had to go on the call on the phone. But the cars then were Hillman Avengers. There was the odd Cortina. We actually had fisticuffs over the Ford Capri that was eventually delivered there, which is a modern car. And the comms was a suitcase set in the back seat, and you had to run the cables through and have it in your hands. The remote buttons and all the gadgetry didn't come along until a little bit later. I mean, obviously then the RCS was a 4-year secondment, and they were very strict about it. So 79 through to 83 was my turn. And the cars then, towards the end of that, got better. But no, it was really interesting. In those days, it was 3 double crew cars or 3 single crew cars then. And you learned very quickly how to manage a car and get out on foot and get back into the team. It was an amazing time, and I again embraced surveillance. I absolutely loved it. And watching people commit crime was the biggest buzz that I ever had. Which of course then led me on later on. I didn't realise it would lead me on to a different area of proactive policing. So what that also at that time was the IRA were then pretty active, and they were out on the day that the bomb went off at Horse Guards Parade when they killed many horses and people. And it was a scary time at that time as well, operating in plain clothes, doing surveillance. There's an awful lot going on. The world was in hindsight, pretty dangerous. It didn't feel like it then.
No.
So we did a lot of cross-border stuff with the Met. And of course, there was a hue and cry about the success of the armed robbers and that nobody's doing about it. And for me, it was then the first exposure to supergrasses. Because at that stage, they began then to look at how can we go on the attack with armed robbers, and the information was coming in that we could cover a plot and then get arrested. And then, of course, then what happened is 1 or 2 of them turned. Some very famous supergrasses in the early 80s that undermined the armed robbers. And, of course, things were changing because, as you know, everything changes.
Yeah.
Nothing ever stands still. But that was an amazing time. And one of the stories that stick out in my mind that I'm happy to talk about was that my then DCI was a man who I absolutely adored. And we had to go and make a payment to a source. And so we jumped in a car down to Basildon to pay him out. And on the way down, we were passing through a lane. I said, "Hang on, Gov." I said, "I know those 2 in that cab." And as it turned out, they were both known criminals from Basildon, so not Langdon. I said, "They're up to no good. There's something wrong here." Anyway, cut what was probably about a 2-hour story short. They eventually turned up at a small shopping precinct down at Basildon, and the passenger got out. It was a man of severe violence, and the cab then pulled around the corner and parked up. And I said to my boss, "Look, boss, you look after the cab because this fella's a handful." He'd actually badly assaulted a police officer some time before, and I said, "Let me take care of him." And I jumped out and jumped into a telephone box and watched him walk up and down. You can tell when somebody starts anxious before they commit crime.
Yeah.
The whole body language changes and up and down. So he's definitely at it. So I picked up the phone and rang Basil and Nick. And luckily, one of the DCs was there, and I knew him. Obviously, I'd been away for a while. I said, "Look, it's Bob Scott." And I said, "I ain't got time for that." I said, "Look," I said, "I've got a fella here," and I obviously named him. And so he's about to do something. And as I said he's about to do something, he went into the post office, come shop, bashed the bloke at the till, and ran out with a big handful of cash. I said, he's just done a till snatch at such and such. Put the phone down. I chase across the car park behind him. He hears me. He turns around and says, in industrial language, "Go away and stop bothering me." And then realises me, "Oh, fuck," he said, "It's you, Mr. Scott." So he started running, and I then grabbed him and got hold of him. And he never let go of the money. And I held him down in the middle of the road. And he said, "Look, who's grassed on me?" And I said, "Nobody's grassed on you. You've just been unlucky." He said, "Look, I'll give you half the money if you let me go." So I said, "No, I'm not." He said, "I'll give you all the money if you let me go." And with that, of course, the cab turns up. And he says to the cab driver, "Get him off me." Well, of course, what he didn't know was that cab driver many years before had been an informant. So I said to him, if you get out of that car, you know what's going to happen, don't you? And of course, so he was then one leg in, one leg out doing the okie-dokie. And the next thing is my boss, my DCI, drives across the grass verge, straight in between me and the car, jumps out, and then suddenly the blue lights and two-tones, and they all turn up. He gets nicked. And, those are the sort of things that happened to me throughout my career. I was always seemed in the right place at the right time. It was a good day. But, the Regi was something that set me up, for my love of proactive policing, and also gave me my first opportunity to experience the undercover role.
Yeah.
And that was only because I was the youngest. I had this full Kevin Keegan curly perm.
Good looking bloke.
What about that? But certainly, I still, in those days, you put baby oil in your hair. So your leather coats used to have that dripping, that stain of baby oil. I mean, it was nuts. And I came in one day and said, we've got a source that's well into a team of antique robbers. They've got a warehouse full of stolen antiques, and the source is prepared to take something in there. And we need somebody to go there and pretend to be the buyer. So of course I said, well, I'll have a go. There was no rules, there was no training, there was no support, there was no nothing. And they said, all right. So I said, well, what do you want? I said, well, I don't really know what I want. So we'll have to meet the source. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. I said, but I need a car. Well, the DCI in those days was the only one with a half decent car. So we then did a quick PNC check and found a number that didn't exist and got a set of plates made. I took the rent out the window, put the plates on till the car was done. Then we got, I think it tells you how old it was, got £5 notes. And we then cut some paper up because they wouldn't let me have much money, and put the odd £5 note top and bottom of a wedge of cut up money and put it in the bag. And that was it. I was ready to go. So I then drove and met the source. And he said, look, just do as I tell you, boy, and you'll be all right. Okay, fine. Off we went and met them, and they then said, obviously got spoken to, just to make sure I was proper. Right? And then I got taken to this place right in the middle of nowhere, up in Suffolk, and it was absolutely stacked full of antiques, stolen antiques. And of course, then the job was then to get them to bring the goods out in the open, because what I'd done, I'd been taken. I couldn't tell you where I'd been taken. The days of tracking devices and the rest of it, no mobile phones. I mean, you were on your own. Anyway, cut a long story short, we did a deal. We agreed to meet at a very well-known junction. They'd bring all the gear that I'd selected that I wanted. And we had a meeting. Of course, unfortunately, they got nicked as they turned up at the meeting, and they were all nicked, and the warehouse was searched, and they recovered all the goods. That was my first taste. And of course, then I've gone from being a uniformed PC and loving it, to want to be a detective and loving it, to be a detective who deals with crime, to saying, actually, I like the idea of looking at future crimes, to then to a regional crime officer dealing with, international gangsters of all, and they weren't international, that's a lie, they're national gangsters who are committing robberies and the like, to then participating in crime, which then I thought, this is where I want to be. Of course, lo and behold, my time was virtually up then. So I then finished there and went to Chelmsford Town.
Oh, did you?
For 2 years. Yeah, Chelmsford Town probably hated me more than I hated Chelmsford Town. Yeah. But it had nothing to do with Chelmsford or the people or the police, because I had some great fun there.
Yeah.
It was just, it felt like my legs had been cut off, and I was pretty unhappy. I was a big drinker in those days as well.
Oh yeah.
And
that was part of the culture, though, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. But I was very unhappy at Chelmsford. And so it had nothing to do with the station, the town, the people, because I got stuck in, and we had some great results. It was just a different pace.
Yeah. And
of course, having come from being involved in carrying guns covertly, following robbers, supergrasses, top end criminals, to dealing with local criminals was tough.
Yeah.
Tough for everybody that was involved. That lasted 2 years, and I then got a call to say, would I want to be part of the new CDU at headquarters?
So what year was this?
This would have been about 84. So
just about the time of Jeremy Bamberg?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. Just after then, yeah. And I think it was Maggie was then under pressure, because, of course, in the early 80s, what happened is those people who'd committed robberies in the 70s had loads of money, had their places in Spain and elsewhere. And then they realised they could convert all that ill-gotten gains, because they were swimming with money, into drugs. And then it was puff, mostly.
Yeah.
The heroin population then, although I didn't know much about drugs then, was pretty stable. The cocaine was for the rich and famous. People did speed who wanted an upper, but everybody wanted a bit of puff. And unbeknownst to me, because I'd been off it for a while, drugs were emerging in quite a big way. And I got accepted for the new CDU, went up there, and you go for this old stable block, went for the door of the old stable block at headquarters, and the door in front of me was the door to the DI's office. He said, come in here. So I went in there. He said, welcome to new CDU. So I said, great, I'm really looking forward. And I thought it'd be back like the old days, from the RCS days, chasing robbers and having great fun and all that sort of thing. He says, you're with me. So what do you mean with me? So I'm the DI on the drug squad. You're going on the drug squad. I said, no, I don't want to go on the drug squad. I don't know nothing about drugs. I don't know nothing about drugs. It's not me. So we ain't got a choice. You're on it. And that's where that started. And it's a brand new team. There's some really good guys. And I think, I said before we started, the most important thing about all of what I'm saying here was that I was part of a team.
Yeah.
It is always about a team. I've been in some good teams and some very good teams. But nothing I've done or achieved has been on my own. It's always been with good teams. And I love working with good teams. Although some people see me sit outside that a little bit at times, I still see it as being part of the team.
But you're part of that jigsaw, and I make you absolutely right, because I get sick to death of watching people on the television who regale the great job that they did as the SIO or this, that and the other. They never start with the caveat, I was part of that team.
Yeah. I understand why, because in the end it's their role in it that people want to hear about. But say that was that. So I took all those skills and experiences I'd had in the first 10 years, 73 to 83, which was a lot. Basildon, as I say, was an amazing learning curve. The RCS was an unbelievable opportunity to learn even more. Chelmsford Town, I stood still. And then here I was now at the birth of a new squad. Because drugs, I'm sure, were investigated before then, but they hadn't done it in that way. So there was a few guys there that I knew, but there was some I didn't. And we looked at what we could and couldn't achieve with a small team. I think there was 10 of us. And from 85 onwards, because we had to get it kitted up, the only thing that became a contentious point, and I'm not sure when this was when the first mobile phone turned up. It was a big brick. Now again, there was fist fights over who should have it out in the car. Who could ever believe that you have a phone out in the car? Pages were commonplace, loads of pages. But a mobile phone, well, it was hardly mobile because you could hardly pick it up. The battery was so big. So that was that. But what we decided was we'd look at Essex then, in the same way as it probably still is now, was that the flow of criminality and drugs particularly came out of the East End, if not in from the coast on the importation, and up through the rest of East Anglia. But the relationships were built through Essex. And it was clear that amphetamine sulfate, speed was a big deal. Puff, cannabis was a big deal. Heroin was a pretty stable thing, and we didn't know much about it. It was always regarded as a dirty drug that nobody knew much about, which it isn't. But we didn't learn a bit more about that until later. And we learned on our feet about how to investigate drugs in a team. Surveillance was great, but of course costly. And surveillance needed good information. Otherwise, you'd sit for ages. And the days of sitting around on plots then was beginning to go because money paid over time was in, which it wasn't such a big deal in the early days of my career. And budgets were much more restricted. So we looked at how could we be proactive. And of course, with my UC skills, I said to then DI, well, let's look to see if we can buy it. Let's draw on a plot and see if we can nick them in the act of selling the drugs. And that's when my UC career started again. And I was with some like-minded people who bought into that. And we then honed our skills on the drug dealers that were in the East End that were dealing into Essex, bringing them into Essex so that,
it's on our patch,
and I'd wonder why we wanted them just to go across the, but it wasn't M25 then. I think perhaps it was then, but it hadn't been open long. And have a deal and have them off.
Brook Street roundabout.
Yeah, absolutely. There or thereabouts, or the Orset Cock, or all along there. And we had some great success and some failures. We made some mistakes, and we learned a lot. It was a lot of both. But it was a really exciting time again. Lots of things going on, lots of things changing. As you'll know from the history of Essex, as we moved through the 80s into the 90s, then there was the party pills and pay parties and all those sorts of things. And cocaine became, much more of an affordable thing. Speed was still massively in the middle of all that. And we had loads of amphet factories in Essex, particularly in the Harlow area, the Italian Quarter and out there. And there was a real hardcore of people who were manufacturing both from the Met into Essex, but also Essex criminals that were then got involved in manufacturing speed. And we knocked over quite a few factories, drug factories, illicit labs. And they were great fun.
But the policing, and I'm sure they probably do it, but we had a precursor officer, didn't we? Somebody who would actually go and see what chemicals were being sold, by who, where they were going. And all of a sudden you've started to build the clues up. And I don't know, I hope it still goes on to a certain degree. But I remember the times, and it was brilliant. I mean, I had so much fun. But when you were doing your undercover stuff, there was no terms of engagement. There was no ripper or anything like that.
No, I mean, well, of course, Pace came in '84, which of course bypassed me because I really didn't get too involved in interviewing people anymore from about '84 onwards. And no, the undercover side of it, the rules of engagement and the management of it, and the evidential value and the risks and pitfalls of participating in crime. There was nothing then written down, but in hindsight, what we did, we created our own rules, our own pocketbooks, our own guidelines, and as it turned out, they weren't a million miles away from where they ended up. Now that was I think it was much good fortune, because going on to what I said earlier, we then operate with 2 area drug squads in the Met, Essex drug squad. We had a very strong working relationship with them because, again, there was a lot of flow. And so we then met some of the undercover guys from the Met. And unbeknownst to us at the time, the Met were then beginning to look at formalising national guidance and plans for the use and deployment of undercover officers. And that wasn't until the end of the 80s that became agreed and accepted. But we'd obviously met a lot of the guys then that became the pioneers of the new system. Unbeknownst to us, we'd met them. Because then, obviously, what happened was in the late 80s, we were invited to go on the National Undercover course. Myself and my pal went on it. The first 2 Essex officers were on it in 1999 and 91.
And how long had that course been in place?
A couple of years.
Right.
A couple of years by then, I think, yeah. And, of course, again, another epiphany, another eye-opening opportunity to see things done that we've been doing, which we weren't doing too badly at, in fairness. We weren't miles away. Clearly we passed the course, and it was a tough 2-week course. Not everybody did, quite a high failure rate, and some tough days involved there, which set us up. But it also opened our eyes to them was that they'd written the manual and guidance for undercover officers, but they were then beginning to look at writing it for test purchases. Now I know that it's different again now. I'm 20 years gone, and I know that things moved on, and of course, so they should. But then they were making very clear distinctions between the two, between who was undercover, who was a test purchaser, which we never agreed with at that stage. But that's the way the rules were going. And we were then asked to stooge on the test purchase course in the Met.
Yes.
So we then saw at first hand what this was all about, and we thought, this is great. We can take this back with us into Essex and get the organisation to look at it and adopt it. And of course, through the late 80s and early 90s, gang violence and pills and associated crime around drugs had begun to dominate the scene and dominate the press as well. And we began to look at how we could use the skills on the undercover course back into Essex, and then how we could then use what we learned about the test purchasing, the benefit of Essex. And it took a few years. It took to the mid-90s.
Why?
I think that it was being driven from the bottom up to start with. There wasn't really the experience in the command structure who had seen it. And of course, there are many competing interests about dealing with crime, public disorder, and all those sorts of things, let alone look at getting involved in crime that's participating in crime. And there was then, and probably still is now, a lot of misgivings about participating in crime, and yet there's very clear guidance, and has been for years, about how you participate. The issue has always been about how you manage the participation and things that go with it. And of course, there we were on the drug squad. There we were now been adopted by and on the register for National Undercover officers. And we wanted to go out and use those skills. And I have to say that I've loved Essex Police all my life. I've been in and around it, or was in and around it, from the age of 16 to the age of 49. And it gave me the greatest of opportunities for everything that I ever did. It's not required to love, I know, but nonetheless, I love policing and I love Essex Police with all my heart. And in fairness to them, they embraced the position wholeheartedly, because they allowed us to go away and operate. And then from the early 90s through to 2002, I was routinely deployed as a level 1 undercover officer nationally and internationally.
Right.
And throughout that time, got involved in some amazing investigations as part of a team again, with a role to play in that team, where we had huge success at drugs, guns, funny money, counterfeit money, all manner of different things at a very high level. And that really was quite a unique opportunity.
And how had it, it had obviously evolved from that first deployment that you said, I can do that, to the last deployment. How did you feel when you walked out that door and said, that's it, I'm not doing it?
I was happy. I'd fulfilled my contract. I'd done everything that I could do. It was very demanding, because obviously, through the 90s, we as a team, and that was the other guys that were involved with me in the undercover and test purchase arena, we wore 3 and 4 hats at some times for numbers of years. A lot of pressure. We felt a lot of pressure on driving the program, convincing the organisation it was safe to do so, having some setbacks, also managing the officers, male and female officers, who then volunteered to become test purchasers, I'll come on to. We did an utterly amazing job as volunteers, doing our undercover stuff, growing and creating the undercover unit within Essex, which became the first provincial undercover unit, and all the elements that went with driving it bottom up. They're not to say there weren't people in senior ranks who bought into it, because otherwise, without them, we would never have got where we were. But it was demanding. So by the time I got to January the 11th, 2003, I'd fulfilled my obligation.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought I'd never leave, because I was,
ingrained.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I knew that I'd done it, and I was emotionally worn out from the professional point of view.
Yeah.
And I was looking forward naively to a long, happy retirement.
Who knew?
Yeah, absolutely. So those 90s were unbelievably exciting. And I've said that, all the way through.
Yeah.
But it was, because we were pushing the boundaries at every opportunity. And I think when I look back, I pushed the boundaries at every opportunity to operate lawfully, but not be satisfied with where the bar is. Look if we can set the bar higher and higher. Yeah. And going back to what I said, luckily I worked with, I was part of a team that were happy to go on the journey. We had a management structure that were, when they were happy to support us, and they did. So I can't criticise Essex Police, because they were massively supportive, just as you would expect, massively cautious. And of course, being an innovator and pushing the boundaries, you don't want anybody getting in your way.
No.
So of course, at times there were fractious moments, but they were grown-up fractious moments. And looking back now, there were amazing, exciting times, and that doesn't withstand all that was going on in Essex and nearby at the time. There was lots of things going on, lots of serious crime being committed, lots of challenges, which we were pretty much in the middle of. And of course, it took us from 1991, 92 to 96 to get the test purchase program underway. We had to write the program, to get all our speakers, had to get everything organised, as well as do our day job, which was on the drug squad, which we did less and less of, and go out and do our undercover stuff nationally and internationally. I travelled a lot, on some very, very interesting and complicated and high-value investigations. There was a time when, you shouldn't do, but the little team I worked with, and again, we had our own gang. I'm a much believer in,
on the Undercover side, it wasn't about an individual. It was our own gang, and we had had a role to play in it. We were part of the team that had the biggest number of counterfeit passports seized ever. We had the largest seizure of cannabis then, 6.4 tons at Felixstowe. Wow. We had one of the largest seizures of amphet through a factory which we'd got involved with. We were knocking over a little. These were all personal, private successes.
Yeah, of course.
They never hit the headlines, and nor did we ever want them to. They were just great, exciting, professionally fulfilling moments. The downside there is, of course, that your personal and private life.
Yeah, of course, suffers.
Absolutely, and that for that, I'm guilty as charged. I was completely and utterly focused on working. So in 96, we were ready to go, and we did our first 2 test purchase courses in 96. And we didn't know what we wanted to do, but we knew then that the organisation was open to looking at pills in clubs, because there had been a number of things that happened that were high profile. And so we recruited officers outside their probation who had the profile that we could put them into pubs and clubs. And I think we ended up with a dozen guys and girls who were brilliant. To this day, I have nothing but admiration and pride in what those guys achieved. And we all learned together. I mean, obviously they thought we knew what we knew, and we were the vulnerable knowledge, but of course we weren't. We had lots of knowledge, lots of courage, and lots of belief, but we were all feeling our way. And of course, the other thing that happened at those days was the V concert started. Yeah. And there were problems with the Vs. So we then had to build a program of using test purchases, using arrest teams, the whole workings of how you'd find it, buy it, arrest and detain out of a major venue like the V concert. That was I really, really enjoyed the planning stages of the FSU and all the guys that were there. Now, again, all the teams that were involved, and all of them, to a person, embraced the challenge to succeed at doing what we did. The downside was that actually in the end, because there were so many moving parts from A to B, that the division that it was on, which was Chelmsford, picked up the pieces. And they weren't overly happy because some of that planning and preparation hadn't been done. The political side hadn't been done as well as it could be. And they ended up coming in on a Sunday morning, detectives with dozens and dozens in the cells. And it wasn't great. And it wasn't great for them. And there were a few things, we made mistakes there. All the way through, you'll always make mistakes. But all that was going on. And the officers did an unbelievable job in the nightclubs that we did the jobs in. And of course, what then happened was we then were asked to look at helping neighbouring forces. Yeah. So we started rolling out courses for them, started helping them manage their cases, and all the time still having our day jobs and our use. So it was full on. Yeah. I don't know how many hours a day, every day, either in force or out of force. But of course, that was the deal. They let me go and do what I wanted to do, but they expected me to come back and use all those skills for the benefit. Yeah, absolutely. Which I was very happy to do, as were the other guys, and we did. But it was a full on commitment. And through the 90s, we had massive success. I mean, I've got my commendation board down there. Over the 30 years, I was commended 22 times. Wow. And there were many more cases I thought were more worthy, but a lot of those were around the TP we did. Because having proved we could buy and provide evidence and get conviction on test purchasing, they then wanted to open up a bit into, then heroin was becoming a problem. Could we look at heroin? Well, of course, that's a different profile buyer. Yeah, absolutely. But a lot of those guys in the early days said, no, we can transform into heroin buyers. And again, buying heroin on the street and crack cocaine, obviously crack came along at the same time, was a different thing altogether. Much more dangerous, more volatile, more challenging. And of course, although they call it now county lines, back in the mid to late 90s, the dealers from London were already they were taking hostages in flats, old people, disabled people, vulnerable people, and setting up their crack dens and their supply chains from there. And particularly at Basildon and at Grays, we had several jobs which were amazing.
We operated out of disused factories to maintain the integrity of the operation. We bought and integrated our TPs into some really, really difficult, volatile heroin supply chains. They did an unbelievable jobs for a long time. Volunteering.
Yeah.
Go back to uniform or go back to their jobs and do that. And absolutely amazing. And we had huge successes. Of course, again, what the problem with that is that the division then picked up the paperwork. And what then happened, and what we then started to do as we moved in through the late 90s was, well, let's not just draw in the local suppliers, let's bring in the London boys. We did it in the 80s on Drug Squad.
Yeah.
We encouraged them to come in and party with us in Essex. So these guys were already supplying. So what we then did was we upped our game a bit, and we then got strategies that brought them down to their dealers. When they did, we brought them down the day of the races, on the day of the arrests. And that came from my early buying days, where I used to go and buy in the Met, and I'd meet a DCI once, and he'd say to me, "Oh, you're the buyer, are you?" So I'd say, "Yeah." He said, "Right, well, I've got a surveillance team and a firearms team for next Thursday afternoon on the High Street under lamppost number 4. So I want you to make sure the deal you have on the arrest day is under lamppost number 4 on next Thursday." There's no "can you, will you?"
No.
That's what you're going to do. And off he'd walk, you'd never see him again. Yeah, so you learn very quickly, certainly in the Met, that it was buy bust, it was immediate gratification. They didn't have the time, the resources. And so you learn how to social engineer these people into the right place. And so, of course, we took those skills into how we could engineer the more empowered dealers into Essex. We did. But, of course, what that meant was arrests and searches in the Met, along with all this.
Yeah.
And the cases became costly and complex to manage and deal, which obviously wasn't a problem for us, but it was a real problem for the divisions. So what happened before I started to, my 30 years was up, was that they then said, well, that's just our jobs where we deal with the locals. Don't worry about those who are coming in from the outside. Now, I'm not criticising the organisation, but I think that the unforeseen consequence of that for me was, of course, where I think we began to end up, and that was that knocking over your local dealers is all right, but all it did was allowed the
very naive.
Yeah, I get it, Paul. I understand why, but I think that all things have unintended consequences, and we were knocking over some really interesting people out of the Met, always the Met, sometimes in the Midlands, but mostly the Met. But it became very labour intensive for the investigation team, and of course, it took out detectives from their day job for a very long period.
Budgets. I mean, I used to have to fight. If I was running a job, I'd have to fight for the budget to actually do it. Nobody would think, we potentially would have 90 arrests on this and we get this. And you don't have a drugs problem unless you arrest somebody with drugs in their pocket. That's how district divisional commanders see it, because if they don't deal with it, then they haven't got a problem. And it's frustrating.
It is, and I'm sure exactly the same now. I mean, when I walked down the stairs at Basildon, half an hour before duty, which I had to do in my own time, get ready to parade.
Yeah.
And the parade was in my own time. So I'd be ready to go out at 10.
Yeah.
I went down the stairs at Basildon, where the lockers were. The other end of that corridor was the policeman's department, which we never went near or by.
The police women's department.
Yeah, it was down the bottom of the corridor at Basildon Police Station, which I had no dealings with until I actually married a policeman. But I went down the stairs, and this really old-looking fella came up the stairs with a buzz cut. He looked at me, said, "Your first day, boy?" I said, "It is." He said, "I'm finished, mate." He said, "The job's done." He said, "So good luck to you." And that was in March 73. And we all said the same thing, and it all becomes very much cyclical. So I'm quite sure now that it's a much more complex job. Communications, internet, the movement of people, the challenges are greater. But actually, in the end, for me, it's about people. People commit crime, and that's where we succeeded in that period, was that we targeted the people and their crimes that they were about to commit or had committed.
But every crime commences in community. And unless we have that community engagement, then never, you're right, prevention comes before detection.
Yeah.
But unless you've got that community engagement, you're never ever going to get that full on.
Yeah, I couldn't have been any further removed from community engagement. And I loved Basildon and the people of Basildon, and lots of cops down there then were very disparaging. But those people provide OPs and support, generally the older people.
Yeah.
Down there, and I mean, Langdon and Alcatraz, it was then was a tough place. Basildon was a tough place, but there were some beautiful, lovely people there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was in lodgings down there with some wonderful people in my early career. So I think that the community do need the engagement bit, but I got very far removed from that because I got further and further towards participating in crime.
Yeah.
And further away.
But you're still working in the community.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. Well, of course we know we policed in this country by consent. Hopefully not. It's a more challenging environment now for sure, just by what I see. And when I walked out the door in 2003, I thought that's me done. Now I did go back for a while. It wasn't a very happy time for me or them. I don't think back into SOU. And I understand now more why than I did then. It then, spurred me on to go in a different direction. But come 2003, and answer your question, I'd done my bit. I was happy and proud of what I'd achieved, and it was for other people to pick up the baton and run with it.
Oh, absolutely. How do you feel about those people that have let the undercover world down? With their revelations. I mean, we haven't touched on the jobs that you've dealt with. We've touched on what what you've done progressing through your career, but we've got people that have made their revelations. I think they've let the side down, not only in what the kiss and tell stuff, but the way that they've ingratiated themselves within the criminal world, animal rights activists and all those sorts of things. How do you feel about those?
Yeah, now? I mean, it's a complex matter. I was fortunate enough to be involved in the early stages of the animal rights issue from a policing point of view, from an undercover point of view. I forget what it was called now, but it doesn't really matter. The name of the unit, not the Met one. This was the national unit.
Yeah, I
actually didn't even know about the Met Squad. I'd never heard of them. They were part of the SB were always a law unto themselves. But my issue is that the one thing that's always lagged behind is the management and control, the expertise in the management of undercover policing. And I mean the investigations rather than the national program. Is at a local level, because it was then and probably still is now something that you as an investigations manager came across rarely, then the demand on you and the people you trusted to manage the UCs was great at a time when they were participating. In my day, I was participating in very clear, obvious crime. When you come to the animal rights thing, for me, I always saw, and it sounds like I'm being clever at hindsight, there's a massive risk because these were people who had the perfect right to protest about what they believed in. And these weren't criminals committing acts of crime, although some of them were, a small minority were clearly criminally minded and were prepared to commit crime to their cause. But you've only got to look back in the 1960s. In the 1960s, the US police law enforcement agencies had a big problem with bikers and with cannabis. So they then made a decision that they would allow a number of undercovers to live in amongst the bikers to get evidence. They got permission for them to smoke pot. They got permission to live in there. And what happened was, after that, they all finished this, out of the how many they had, over half of them had gone rogue, had been Stockholmed, and lost their way. The others had got puff addictions, and you sit back and say, well, it's quite clear. You see that if you allow people to live in a community where that's the norm, then it's and you're going to let them live there over a long period of time, then you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
So when I saw what they were looking to do with the animal rights, one, I was very uneasy about the ethical side of it. But more of a problem was how they were going to be able to live there in that environment without participating in something.
Yeah.
And being Stockholmed by the whole thing. And finally was the quality of managers looking after them. And the lad that I saw who'd made the first exposure, I felt deeply sad for him because I think he'd been let down by the organisation and those who managed him, because it must have been clear
what was happening,
that something wasn't right. Whether they didn't recognise it, weren't trained enough to recognise it, or were complacent because they saw the greater good. Now, that level of oversight and challenge to what was going on, from the outside looking, because I had no value, no participation in that. Whereas I think the system let them down, not necessarily knowingly, but through a whole heap of those things I've just discussed. So yeah, I think that it was going to happen. It happened in the 60s. It's happened now. Hopefully, it will never happen again in the future, and that the system understands the history of it and the challenges with it, and mitigate as best they can. Where the mitigation was for me in my undercover career was, I was invariably taken in by a well-resourced source, and my exposure to the bad guys was managed over a number of days or weeks, not months, and I was always in and out, and that became troublesome because you saw, and I gave evidence on a number of occasions, and standing in the witness box looking straight in the eye of the individuals that you've betrayed, no matter how much you know you're doing the right thing, is hard, emotionally hard.
Yeah.
And I did it a few times, and it never sat easy.
You almost feel like saying, "I'm sorry."
No. But I did feel that kind of dilemma.
Yeah.
No, I think I've always said my mantra has been love, hug, and betray. I've spent my whole life love, hugging, and betraying.
Yeah.
And of course, everyone looks a bit old-fashioned, and I'm going to have to qualify that by saying that I mean in my professional life, because understanding the boundaries are quite interesting. For many years, I had to go to, as the door undercovers, to have a visit with I can't remember if it was a psychiatrist or psychologist, but either way, it was professional. And I had to travel quite a long way to see them. I used to be once every quarter, and then I went to twice a year. And they were really, really interesting sessions. But of course, they depend on the individual being prepared to disclose, which I was. I went for about 12 years, never got past the age of 11. So I was very happy to chat. But they were great. But now all that side of it came in and was supportive. But then, and I'm a long time away from that, the focus on getting the right managers in place and the cover officers in place never quite caught up in my time. And I think that was one of the things that I think let down those guys there. In hindsight, you can judge it. I don't sit in hindsight. Clearly, it's going to be judged because it's going to be part of the public inquiry, and that'll all come out in the wash.
Which is still ongoing, isn't it? I mean, they're still doing the review into undercover deployments.
And I think that I'm a great believer in the transparency rules. I've said until 1999, I never heard of proportionality, collateral intrusion. And transparency. They were words that I'd never really used, because they were too long really to start with. But actually, when they came along, it made perfect sense to me.
Yeah,
and those around us, it made perfect sense. Now, in 1999, we had a crisis in Essex because one of our investigations into a heroin supply fell over in court, and it fell over in court because of. It was on the cusp of the human rights legislation. Yeah. And the defence said, well, where's all your management logs? Where's the necessity, justification, and transparency on your decision making? And it wasn't there, because actually it was all about the evidence. We'd focused on the quality of evidence. Yeah. But of course they didn't want to focus on that, because in the end they couldn't. It was overwhelming. So then they focused on well, how did you come to those decisions? And it wasn't there. And I know that we had 6 or 7 of these big cases in the pipeline. And what we did was, myself and obviously the other lad that was equally as experienced as I there then, had to go and give evidence. And what we did was, rather than let the operational head go in there and take the flak, we'd go in as the experts and say, right, these are the decisions, this is the decision log, this is how the thing runs, this is what our role is in it is, and we advise the operational head. Yeah. And then we lost that one badly, and the test purchasers suffered greatly out of that. and I mean, emotionally suffered out of losing that case. And we moved on and learned going forward. So, there was, and I could go on forever, Paul. I mean, you're right. I haven't spoken about a specific case. I don't really think it's appropriate.
No, I agree.
Maybe in a different environment, because there's some great stories. I work with some great people, amazing undercovers, some really, really open-minded and forward-thinking managers, DIs, DCIs and superintendents, some of them who I still keep in touch with now, who bought into all that, who love that area of policing. And I assume, 20-odd years on, that, Essex Police are still at the forefront. I hope so, because they had a great, start. I'm sure that they're still hopefully building on the legacy that a few of us built back in the 80s and 90s.
Well, they certainly were when I left in 2016. I mean, and as luck would have it, I would be deployed on a regular basis as the manager, and which was to the detriment of other people because they weren't being able to build their skills in that field. Yeah. But it's a great tactic, and long may it continue.
Yeah, absolutely.
But of course, you've now moved out of the police service and you're into the commercial world.
Yeah.
I mean, 20 years.
Yep.
Intra Orbis.
Intra Orbis is 19 years old. It was incorporated on the 14th of June 2004. And I came out January 2003. Did a little bit of consultancy back into Essex, which in hindsight was a mistake. Didn't really work. Came away from there. I guess late 2003, early 2004. And a pal of mine said to me, look, I'm working for a pharmaceutical company. We're great online. We're taking out counterfeit pharmaceuticals, but we really want to look back up the supply chain. And I know you've got the skill sets to deploy in an undercover capacity commercially, back up the supply chain, and we'll make a bigger impact further up. I'd never heard of counterfeit. Like I'd never heard of drugs in the early days. Counterfeit? I mean, I bought an odd T-shirt, but who doesn't? So it's a big deal. And this was, say, 2004. So I thought, all right, I'll give it a go. The best decision I ever made was learning from a very old mentor of mine, when he came out 8 years ahead of me, was that he continued to be as a sole trader and worked, earned good money, but didn't involve other people. Because he said that, building a business wasn't his thing, and that it's difficult to trust others. They let you down. But the decision I made was that once I'd got and seen it, we had a really great success quite early on, and I got involved with civil lawyers and the freeze and seize orders that you can obtain commercially, which I'd never heard of. The draconian power that in the right circumstances, those kind of things could do. And then it was going after the money of the individuals concerned. And of course, that always excited me, going after their money. And we had a really big success quite early on. And of course, it followed that other people saw that and wanted to get involved with it in terms of potential clients. So it started off as RFS Consulting, and it took off rapidly. In the first 2 years, it grew ridiculous. And I incorporated Intra Orbis because I didn't want it to be RFS Consulting, because that was my initials. I wanted it to be a proper limited company. And Intra Orbis was born. And the name took me forever to think about it.
Yeah, how did you come up with the name?
Yeah, and a lot, not so much now, but Intra is inside, Orbis is a circle.
Right.
I'd spent my whole life. I used to say to operational managers because I developed an operational managers course. I trained lots of managers in the region, and I always say that what we're very good at is sitting outside the ongoing conspiracy, looking in, and either guessing or using information you've got to predict what might be going on.
Yeah.
Whereas with an undercover proactive investigation, you put somebody inside the circle who then gives you evidence of the ongoing conspiracy, which you can rely on.
Makes sense.
So Intra, inside, Orbis, a circle.
Yep.
Operating inside the circle. So that's how it came about. And then 2 years in, it got out of control. And we then had our first team member who was an individual who'd worked with in the police, and she still works for us as an office manager. And I said to Pauline, we're struggling. The invoicing's falling behind. We're a few quid out of pocket. would you want to come out 2 years early? And she took a while to think about it because it was 2 years commutation. Quite a big chunk of money.
Yep.
And Pauline, my wife, then came out 2 years early, took over the back office, and we became joint shareholders and moved the business on. And of course, going back to the theme in my career, I'm always looking to move forward, always challenging the status quo. And the same in business. I'd always, the business mantra is you find great technicians who then have got skills, but they don't want to work for a boss. I vowed I'd never have a master-servant relationship again. Not that I found it difficult, well, I did actually, because I was troublesome at times. And I, in fairness, going back, I had the right of audience at times into the command of Essex Police, well beyond my rank. And that's because I had people that believed in me or believed in us and believed in what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I kind of had an inflated view of where I could or couldn't be, for sure. My arrogance was off the scale at times, looking back. But what it did do in the business was, nothing was impossible. Everything was possible. And so I wanted to build a business. The decision I made was I want to build a small business that didn't just rely on Bob Scott. Because you become a technician, you sell your skills, you get paid for them, and you look for another job. Yeah. But of course, you're going to do so many jobs in a day. So then you become a manager and technician. So you manage yourself and others. And then you become an entrepreneur and a manager, and others deliver, the technicians. So I've gone through that process of being a technician, manager, technician, entrepreneur of the small leagues. I still don't think I'm all that much of an entrepreneur. I'm still learning. And then have managers, which we employ. We've got 2 managers. And obviously we've got a team of 10 overall in our business now, and 26 partners worldwide. Last financial year, we did 572 investigations in 58 countries. And it's grown and grown and grown. Of course, the challenge is you can't stand still. You need to morph, you need to refigure. And it's been a fantastic, I had 30 years in the police, which I didn't think I'd equal. I've had 20 years, which I've enjoyed more than the 30 years. It's been an unbelievable experience.
But do you think, the way I see business is that we're risk managers. I'm not a risk taker. Not in the grand scheme of things. I don't want to walk into a bank and borrow a load of money to progress. I want to progress organically, if that makes sense. But you understand what risk is. So when it comes to running a business, it's no different to being in the police service. It's just a different type of risk.
Yeah, you might see that because obviously you were a manager. I wasn't. I was a DC all my life, and I took the exam once, and me and my closest pal took it at the same time. I failed by a mark. He passed and became, an SIO and chief superintendent, and then gone on into politics. And I love him to the bone. Yeah. And that we took different routes, and we're still, good pals now. But so I had to learn that thing about. I was never a coin operator in the police. Money didn't. I didn't care about being paid. Obviously, I got paid. The reality was I had no idea how valuable the pension was till I come out.
No.
I didn't care. I just wanted to do the job every day and had great days. But when I came into business and started employing people, then I had to understand the value of a pound note. Of course, I'm calling it a pound note. Probably people who want to listen to this have never seen a pound note. No. But
I've still got one.
Yeah, it becomes a whole different mindset. We now as a business have to turn over quite a lot of money to break even each month.
Yeah.
And it's been a success story, and I'm very proud of the team and the business because it's not been about me, it's been about a team. It still is. We have got an absolutely brilliant team now. We manage a huge amount of data. Now, operating as a commercial investigator in the commercial space, it's completely different to the police.
Oh yeah.
You've got no legislation governing you, certainly not in the UK. You have to rely on the skills to have your transparency, justification, proportionality. You have to have clients understand that. When at a time in the commercial space, that's not a requirement. And there are lots of people who don't use it as a requirement. So it's a bit like the Wild West in the commercial space. In the UK, certainly, because it's not legislated for. But it is a very, very active and busy space, certainly around brand protection, which is where we've specialised. And it would come as no surprise to you that in the early days now, I brought my undercover skills. And I travelled the world involving myself in commercial criminals. They're not criminals as we know in the police, but some of them are. And learning where the line is between what's a police matter and what's a commercial matter is a challenge. And as you would expect, I hit that line and came in a slight conflict with the police and the organisation because I'd pushed up against that line.
Yeah.
And I learned a very valuable lesson there. But I've travelled. I've met counterfeiters, manufacturers of counterfeiting, distributors in China, in Hong Kong, in the Middle East, and we've had some amazing successes, big jobs. We seized over 5.5 tons of counterfeit foodstuffs in Latvia, and operating in and around Riga. That's amazing. And our small team have taken out internationally involved counterfeiters, and we still do. And I find that so
Fantastic.
Rewarding. Where we've got none of the no PNC, no intelligence. We've built our own intelligence process, which is akin. Again, one of the things that Ripper and human rights and PACE taught me is more so in the commercial space, in my view, particularly in the UK where there's no written constitution for commercial investigators, and as we know, PIs are under investigation too, for lots of things that went on before which were wrong and shouldn't have happened but have. To show that a legal approval process, a thought process behind why you're going to do it, how you're going to do it, and cost it out, and then go and deliver on that written investigation plan is essential to good governance in the commercial space. Now, not everybody does that because actually it rarely gets called into question. But for us, one of the things I did early doors was I met a very senior lawyer in a law firm in London who I regard as a friend now, who was my mentor on the commercial side of civil litigation. And they have to be sure that what you've done has been done in the right way. And that was fine because that's how we operate. And so we've had some big successes through the commercial litigation as well. It's been an amazing ride. It's 50. I look around now. I'm 70 in December. I'm as enthusiastic and thrilled with what I do and what we as a team do as I've ever been. And Pauline, my wife, wants me to stop. You must want to retire now, approaching 70. And I can't even begin to see what that looks like and feels like.
But you've got to have purpose, and you're obviously driven from the age of 15 when you applied to become a cadet to this point. That drive is a constant thread.
Yeah.
So, but if you packed up, how would you fill that void? And Bob Scott, I'm not sure you'd be able to do that. Even with Pauline saying, you've got to hang up your gloves, you've got to have purpose.
Yeah. Absolutely. You come here today at a time in my life where I am questioning all those things, because I've always questioned myself. I've always been introspective. What have I done? Have I done good? Have I done bad? And if I've not done good, I've been prepared to throw my hands up. But I'm really at a time in my career where I can't see a pathway beyond just doing what I'm doing. There must be one. I'm a portrait artist from my sins. I'm an amateur portrait artist from my sins. When I left in January 2003 into 2004, I went back to school to go back to hone my skills in pastel pencils. Yeah, I did pets and people. I've got great artists way back in my family. It's in my DNA somewhere. I'm not a great artist. I could be better. I'm a reasonable artist. And I enjoyed it. But of course, the drive and that individual that I am wasn't content with sitting down. I met some fabulous people, very much older than I, but I got bored very quickly. And I needed another purpose, which Introbus became. And I'm not ready to go back to drawing and painting yet, but that's one thing. But no, I think that whatever happens, I'll be doing something, probably till pretty much the day I pop my clogs, which,
But if you've got a good team that's running the business and doing that side, and you can have that interaction, then long may it continue.
Yeah, I think the challenge for me is that somebody has to drive any business.
Yeah.
Complacency, is the killer. Yeah. In a business, you either go backwards or you go forwards. You can't stand still.
No.
So therefore, you need somebody to be the innovator, the creator, the driving force. And Pauline is as much responsible for that as I am, because one, she allows me the bandwidth to do that. My life is settled. We have a great life. We've got a great home. So that side of it, luckily I haven't got to spend a lot of time worrying about it. Not that I ever would. She allows me the freedom to be that entrepreneur that I want to be. I'm not there yet. I'd like to be a much better entrepreneur than I am. Whether I'll ever get there, I don't know. But what I do know is that the space that I'm in, the commercial space I'm in, is huge. There's bags of opportunity. There's a lot of us out there, ex-customs, ex-spies, ex-military, ex-police. We're all out there offering our solutions in the brand protection space. Obviously the cyber bit is big. The online bit is big, but I'm a people person. So I focus on how we can identify people at it and providing the evidence to somebody, do something about it. Interesting enough, the one thing I've done very little with is referrals to the police. We got involved in a few cases with the PIPQ, with trading standards and with customs. But invariably, they turned out not to be great experiences. And brands who are progressive use the authorities quite sparingly, because they're it is a very difficult environment to operate in.
But do you think there's a lack of understanding from the authorities, or a lack of commitment? Because from look, I've got a jaded police view around all this, but if you go back historically, when certain sections of the community were selling counterfeit DVDs, historically that money was going back into terrorism. Organised crime groups have got well and truly entrenched in the counterfeit supply. And actually, if the police were more cooperative and worked closer with brand protectors, then actually they could take out a lot more classy criminals.
Well, first of all, you're right. Organised crime I've always had their feet in here.
Yeah.
Because I remember back in the 90s, buying a big parcel of, I'm talking about millions of pounds worth of funny money, or counterfeit documents, particularly passports. And they'd have a big parcel of counterfeit clobber. And in those days, nobody was interested in it.
No.
And because the priority was obviously the funny money and the passports. But they routinely were there. But no, certainly over the last 20 years, the marketplace has changed. The counterfeit marketplace has changed. Where counterfeiters in China and Southeast Asia, because it's not only China, were manufacturing counterfeits and advertising. Now they've got wiser and more careful about it. Pharmaceuticals and tobacco have always been very attractive to organised crime because there was no risk. Is there a risk now? I'm sure there must be, but I'm sure, I trust in the establishment. I'm sure, maybe I'm being naive, that at the right levels, these things are still pretty much on the table. I think people associate counterfeits with Spanish holidays, marketplaces, and online cheap deals. Now, where we've operated at is corrupt business people moving containerfuls of counterfeit of all descriptions. Certainly in recent years, it used to be lifestyle drugs. I've travelled on the train with thousands of blisters of Viagra, scared they're going to fall out off the rail into the floor. I've bought thousands and thousands and thousands of Viagra as part of an investigation, and that evidence then used commercially in a civil litigation. But now it's life-saving drugs that are being counterfeited, cancer drugs, Alzheimer's drugs, and
disgusting.
Absolutely, and it is a massive problem. Foodstuffs, we've been involved in the IT sector. Nobody ever died by buying a counterfeit T-shirt or a piece of IT, but actually that IT gets into banks, hospitals. There are many, many things now. Well, there's nothing that isn't counterfeit that's got a global demand.
Well, you look at the counterfeit demand in wine, for instance. That's like $1 billion industry per annum. Counterfeit fireworks. The health and safety element of all of this, you don't have to look at the issues when they had the wine where they put antifreeze in it. If it's the health scares and it's the risks that are placed around it.
Well, I've kind of brushed over 30 years, and I now just brushed over. And some people might think we haven't brushed over it, but we have. and I've brushed over 20 years. The counterfeit market, the whole commercial crime piece is huge. And there are lots of good people doing lots of good things. You know, there are lots of good people, lots of good companies doing stuff online, because clearly online is where this stuff is used to just be sold openly. It's not so open now, but the online market space is very vibrant. The offline market space is as busy as ever been. But where it's now become selected brands, it's a lot more products that are being counterfeit. Social media sites are being used more. There are a lot more closed groups. You know, it goes back, what it reminds me of is the days of the heroin dealers who used to go, you can't get into a heroin dealer because it's a closed community. Well, at the time we got into it, it became a little more open, but it was only open onto estates. And we got our boys and girls into the estates and buying from purporting to be heroin users, and they were absolutely unbelievable at doing it. The same now of counterfeit, because it's being squeezed, it's finding new ways to be a safer place to trade in. But in the end, there's a massive consumer demand. And like drugs and narcotics, illicit drugs, where there's a consumer demand, there's a huge consumer demand. So there's clearly, academics, people much cleverer than I, looking at, well, you're never going to solve it. And of course you're not. And of course, all you ever do is, I kind of liken it to that break in nature. All you can do is slow it down or interfere with it. And I think the words that cropped up in the late 1990s, 2000s was disrupt and cause disruption.
Yeah.
And detect and disrupt, dismantle. I think they were kind of the phrases that came up. And the same now applies there. And of course, brands have a different view of what success looks like.
Yeah, because they're willing to take a percentage of loss, aren't they? So everyone's got a threshold of what they consider to be reasonable, where it impacts. I mean, some companies will go after people that make decals of motorcycle brands. They'll do a cease and desist, but other companies will let them carry on manufacturing because they see it as a good way of promoting their actual brand. So
I'm not sure. I think that for me, the global brands are all on a journey. And I hate this phrase, but it's true. And it's cyclical. And you start off with not realising you've got a problem, maybe suspecting you have, and absorbing it into your margins. And then that problem becomes a bigger margin, and then it starts to affect your bottom line, and then you've got your shell to think of. And they then decide to put something in place. And lots of people put the bare minimum in place because they don't want to spend any more money than they think they have to. And then you've got other companies that have gone through a much tougher journey and have got much more mature programs and deal with it differently. But what happens is then as they move through to be a component part of the brand, then they've seen others ebb away, and that people change and they reduce down their program. And then you've got others that are coming up. So always there's a cyclical thing about brand protection solutions, because in the end, a widget maker makes and sells a widget for a profit. They don't make a widget to protect the brand of it.
No.
Now, notwithstanding that everybody now, almost everybody's put in place, trademark and all those sides of it. I'm talking about now where you've got a proactive attack on your brand by copying everything, whether it's technical or physical. Yeah. And in some cases, other brands go, that's the risk of doing business. We accept the risk because the numbers are relatively small. Where we've seen that happen is actually it can at times overwhelm a business, counterfeit. And then they try to do something about it. And we had one a few years ago where it almost overwhelmed it. And we infiltrated the supply chain and the manufacturers, and we did a joint operation with investigators in China. And they took out the whole 9 yards in China, based on what we provided out of China back into China. And as I said to you before, we've got 26 partners. We've done some great work in Indonesia and the Philippines around counterfeit seeds, corn seeds. Now, can you believe it? Something like corn seeds are counterfeit, but they are. And of course, where they affect it is you've got countries that rely on their farmers. The farmers are the pillars of their communities, and they provide the food for their communities. If those seeds don't bring the yield and they can work out the yield, they can't feed their citizens. So it's a massive problem. And of course, this problem has been going on for years, and we, again, through a great partner we've got down in Southeast Asia, they infiltrated the gang, and we took out 5.5 tons of counterfeit seeds on a raid action following surveillance observations over a period of time. And what I couldn't get over was the sophistication of the counter surveillance manoeuvres and the tactics of the counterfeits they put in place to frustrate the authorities. Then you had a problem of getting the police involved, but the guys down there did it. But for me, solving them puzzles is as exciting whether it's one thing or 1,000 things. Solving the puzzles is the thing. And the buzz is seeing our team at Interorbis manage that, deal with the data, provide the evidence, and then provide the client with the chance of either police action or civil restitution. And that never diminishes that thrill, whatever it is, it never diminishes.
Do you get involved in private prosecutions?
We haven't done, because I know there are some that do. No, some of my competitors do. But where I see that is that if you look at the counterfeit marketplace, it's a pyramid, it's an inverted pyramid. You've got the manufacturer at the top of the point, and as you come down along the bottom of the pyramid, and I don't mean the bottom as in any less important, but across the bottom of the pyramid, there are many more obvious manifestations of counterfeit. Your marketplaces, your beaches on holiday, your online space where you can buy it. In my experience, a lot of those private prosecutions in the UK are identifying people who are active along the bottom of the pyramid. Yeah. Which is fine, and deep respect for them doing that. But where we've tend to operate is beyond that. Yeah. So where we've got involved as a company is either they take it out at source or at distribution level somewhere from the source country. As you'll know, the Middle East is a hub. Certainly Dubai is a hub. Take it out there or take it out at the source country. But once it gets here and starts to be distributed, it's more difficult to do something about it unless you get those who bring it in.
Well, absolutely, because what you're doing is it's like whack-a-mole, isn't it? You're taking the one out here, but they'll say there's one in London, but there'll be another two in Birmingham, and it's actually infiltrating. You need to go that one step beyond.
Yeah, well, need is an interesting word. I think there are some who, you don't need to, but you can do. I think that the guys that do that work incredibly hard and are very successful at it. And I take my hat off to them that do it. It's just, I think really what it comes down to, again, is a bit of my old arrogance. And that is I wanted to do what I liked doing. And I loved the challenge of going further up the supply chain. Yeah. In the police, it was the drug supply chain or the stolen goods supply chain, whatever it was. I wasn't satisfied with nicking Harry and Billy, the handlers or the thieves. Not thieves, the handlers and the distributors. I want the thieves and the major players. Yeah. And I took that same ethos into the business because what I learned was it was all very well satisfying my ego to take out bigger parcels. But as a business model, it wasn't sustainable because brands didn't have the budget or the will to continue taking out big parcels all the time. They needed to take out, make smaller gains elsewhere. Yeah. So now as a business, we do hundreds of test purchases a year, online or in person. The number of managed undercover investigations are probably a handful now, and they ebb and flow. But we still have them. And our clients' appetite for doing them ebbs and flows. Because in the end, it's the business imperative that matters. And that is they make widgets to make a profit. Yeah. Whatever their widget might be. And so that's their focus, not investigating.
No, of course.
They buy into it when they have to, and I get that. And they use it when they have to. Some clients have had great successes and then I've put it to bed for a while. Because they want to focus more on other things, making money, making widgets.
Are your parents still around?
No, both my parents. My mum died at 63 of breast cancer, which was a shocking day. And my dad died in his early 70s. But so I had a challenging relationship with my father, so we were never close.
What do you think you'd say now, Bob?
My dad?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what he'd say. It was a very fractured relationship, so I'm sure he would be proud, but he would never say so. He wrote a book, my dad.
Did he really?
Yeah, because he did some very, very interesting investigations worldwide as an investigator, well before, he used to take his own fingerprints and do his own scientific stuff, and he'd do it in Borneo. Wow. He'd send his fingerprint off to Australia. And he wrote a book called something about Jack Scotland. It was his pseudonym. And it was actually, for me, it wasn't a great book to read because it was a series of ex-cop reporting, It didn't draw you in. But he wrote a book and published it privately. I don't know how many copies he sold. I've got a copy somewhere. But I don't know is the truth answer.
I think you'd be proud, mate. I look at, I've known you, as I say, for an awful long time, and you've done really, really well. What next for Intra-Orbis, say?
Good question. I think that I've still got ambitions to grow. I used to have huge ambitions to be, really big, but you learn to temper those ambitions with reality. If I haven't got an ambition to grow, then you stand still and you end up going backwards. So we're still looking to grow. We've just increased our team, another full-time member of the team. We're still increasing our partnership approach because what's happened in the pandemic, one, we lost a huge chunk of revenue because the brands shut down.
Yeah.
So they weren't investigating. They were more worried about their manufacturing and distribution, and quite rightly. And we had a bit of an epiphany over the pandemic, and we've been through a recession, a pandemic, and now a second recession. We're still here. So our job then was can we survive? And we survived the pandemic. We lost something over 40% of our revenues. But in 2019 was our best year. 2020, 21 was our worst years.
Right.
2022 was just short of our best year in 2019. So we've gone back up. The ambition now is to grow beyond 2019's level and continue to grow organically, because amongst all this, we've never borrowed any money. We've self-financed the business.
Yeah.
It has been organic growth. Where we're at now in our life cycle is that organic growth's okay, but it's slow.
Yes, it is.
And, from a personal point of view, it's never been about the money, although obviously, we've done okay out of it. It's about being that entrepreneur now.
Yeah.
What can I create beyond what I've already created? Yeah. And I say I mean, again, I've used the word I, but it's a team effort. Without having a great team who buy into what we're trying to achieve, and they do massively.
Yeah.
They do. I mean, I go in the office only a few days a week now. And when I sit in my office and listen to the team problem solve for themselves, each of those individuals are always looking to make a better contribution.
Yeah.
Which is amazing, because I come from an organisation like you where not everyone, but a large part of what they did then is a job. They did their job, went home. And that's what an employee does. So it's not a criticism, it's an observation.
Yeah.
And there were less people who are driving, creating the opportunities, pushing the boundaries. Now, in our small business, each individual buys into what we're trying to achieve and wants to make it better. And it's amazing. I absolutely am in awe of each and every one of them.
That's brilliant. And you're quite right. If we all had that same drive, then the marketplace would be absolutely stuffed. You wouldn't be able to have a good team because everybody would want to be an entrepreneur. So you've got to have.
Yeah, I think the reality is that there are people who want to be employed and those who want to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And that's where, like a football team, you can't have all strikers. You need a blend. And I think that in our small business, we've got a great blend, and our partners too. I had a bit of a family tragedy over the weekend. One of my cousins phoned me from Singapore, and his wife died. Died. And he was all alone. So I said, wait a minute, I'll ring up my partner in Singapore. And I rang him, who instantly picked up the phone and rang my cousin to provide him whatever support he could.
Yeah.
To me, that's just the beauty of being part of a big team. And that to me, that meant more what he did for me in Singapore than anything else.
Yeah.
And he and his team have provided fantastic success for us. And of course, going back to the pandemic, our business model changed to being, an overseer of investigations worldwide rather than a deliverer of investigations in UK and Europe. So we do, so in 58 countries, probably, 60% of what we do, maybe more, is outside of the UK and Europe. It's all over the world. South America, we've had some great successes there. China, we work quite closely on occasion. Middle East, we've got a great partner in the Middle East, an unbelievable team there. And elsewhere in Africa and elsewhere. I mean, it's unbelievable that an ex-military council-house kid with little ambition, certainly very little in a way of qualifications, because I think I probably still am slightly dyslexic and failed my exams, although I worked hard. So with very little qualifications behind me, but with a lot of self-belief and determination and drive, here we sit on the cusp of my 70th birthday. And I can look back and say, I can hardly remember a bad day in all. I must have had, certainly professionally anyway, bad days that I've had, and there have been very few, and I've enjoyed every second. And genuinely, this last 20 years has been the most fulfilling professionally I've had. So I guess anybody that might be listening to this that's coming to the end of their 30 years, what to do. People say you've got great skills, you have, but you need to know what their value is, true value in the marketplace. You need to have a vision and a desire, but determination and hard work are still the cornerstones to achieving anything. With that, and the commitment, because you will have good days and bad days. And again, thankfully, the 20 years in business, as it will be, 20 years for me, but 19 years for the business this June, I really haven't had that many bad days. Challenges, yes. Failures, yeah, certainly. But I've never been afraid of failing. Now, Richard Branson was a great role model for me. And he said many years ago, I've had more failures than success, but I don't dwell on the failures. I just move on to the next success. And that's very true. You have to be there. You have to fail to be able to succeed.
Yeah,
because if you do nothing, then you won't succeed. So no, I am aware that I've talked a lot, and I could probably go on for a lot longer. But
I've really enjoyed it, Bob. And before I go any further, I'll give you the old adage. Is there anything you'd like to add, alter, or correct in relation to the stories that we've just gone through?
I'm signing no statement, mate.
Bob, I wish you every success for the rest of the year and beyond, and a happy 70th birthday later on. And thank you so much for your time.
No, it's a pleasure. I hope actually the listener finds it interesting and not boring and switches stuff halfway through.
They will love it, mate. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Paul.
Cheers.
Thanks, mate.